Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for attending the 387th YIES Yomiuri International Economic Society lecture meeting today, despite your very busy schedules. Thank you so very much. Today's speaker is Mr. Shigeru Ishiba, the 103rd Prime Minister of Japan. I'm sure he defies any detailed introduction on my part, but Prime Minister Ishiba graduated from the Faculty of Law of Keio University. He entered Mitsui Bank, and in July 1986, he was elected to the House of Representatives for the first time. And in September 2002, he became the Director General of the Defense Agency. After that, he served as the Minister of Defense, Agriculture, Forestry, and Fisheries, as the Chairperson of the Policy Research Council of the LDP and Secretary General of the LDP, as well as the Minister in charge of overcoming population decline and vitalizing local economy. He became the Prime Minister of Japan in October of this year. And I'm sure he must have been very busy with the passage of the three political reform-related bills the day before yesterday, and also the yet-to-face cabinet decision on the government budget. Now, his title is Basic Policies of the Ishiba Administration, and after the lecture, we will entertain some questions. So, Mr. Ishiba, please. May I speak? Can I speak now? Yes, please do. Hello, everyone. And thank you very much for that kind introduction. I am the Prime Minister of Japan. I'm not used to that title yet, but my name is Shigeru Ishiba. And I'd like to thank you for giving me this opportunity to share my views with top corporate executives and dignitaries from various countries at this economic society, which is a gathering that has a history of more than half a century, I hear. Now, I normally don't read from a script, but today I will. Because of my recently assumed position, I cannot make any mistakes or slips of the tongue. So I'll be reading from a script which I'm not very used to, so I hope that you'll bear with me. Now, I must begin with a few words on the passing of Mr. Tsuneo Watanabe, Representative Director and Editor-in-Chief of the Yomiuri Shimbun Group. And I would like to offer my deepest condolences and hope for his repose. When I was very young, I was fortunate to have met him and received many learnings from him, particularly about the Japanese views of history and how to view the nation and the national structure. I think those were the things that I learned most from him, and I wish that I could have learned so much more from him before his death. So I truly regret his repose. And in 1967, that's the 42nd year of Showa, when I was still in, I believe, elementary school, maybe the 5th grader in elementary school. Back then, he wrote a book called Political Factions and the Age of Multi-Party Systems. And it was, I believe, reedited and republished recently. And it is full of insights about what political factions are, what political parties are, and what is the LDP. It's really full of insights. It also talks about what is democracy and the future course of Japan as a peace-oriented pacifist nation. I received so much learning and insights from that book. So once again, I would like to offer my deepest condolences, and I do pray for the peaceful repose, for his peaceful repose. On October 14th, I was still in Taiwan back then. August 14th, I was in Taiwan when I was attending a group of young parliamentarians to this was about 20-odd years ago, to think about the future defense role of Japan. And Nakatani-san, Hamada-san, and Maehara-san, we were all young back then. So we formulated this group of young parliamentarians to think about the national security of Japan, but now it's grown into a group of middle-aged, maybe old parliamentarians. And we meet often, and the president and vice president of Taiwan had been replaced at that time. And so we knew that we had to go and speak to them. And so we met with President Lai and Shou Bikin, the vice president, and the former president Tsai Ye-mon. We talked with these individuals. This was in mid-August of this year. And just when we were engaged in this discussion, news came in that Prime Minister Kishida will be stepping down. I received a small note, and that was the start of a very violent days. Well, I'm in my 39th year as a parliamentarian. I've spent a long time in the Diet, and I think within the LDP, there were 46 people who were elected to the Diet at the same time as me. The most famous is, of course, Mr. Yukio Hatoyama. Mr. Hatoyama, or Tsutomu Takebe, Shoke Arai. So many famous names. So 46 new Diet men or Diet persons in the LDP, but now of them remaining are Ichiro Aisawa in the House of Representatives, also Seiichiro Murakami, and Kisaburo Tokai, and myself. So only 4 out of 46 are remaining in the House of Representatives. And I've been working as a parliamentarian for many years, and I've seen many LDP presidential elections. And of course, I did not intend to make the Guinness Book, but this is my 5th time, or this was my 5th time to run for the presidency of the LDP. And in the long history of presidential elections in the LDP, this was unprecedented that 9 people ran for the presidency election. So this was truly an unprecedented presidential race with a record number of 9 candidates. And fortunately, the final runoff vote was between Sanae Takaichi and myself, and I was with a very slim margin chosen as the president of the LDP, and I also became the Prime Minister of Japan on October 1st. Then, after that, we received a very harsh judgment from voters in the House of Representatives election, and whether that decision to dissolve the Diet and call an election at that time was correct or not, well, that's all hindsight. I have to take full responsibility for that decision. In any event, the ruling coalition, the LDP and Komeito, was not able to reach the majority. We became a ruling minority. And then I visited Laos and South America for top leader diplomacy, and then engaged in deliberations on the political reform and supplementary budget bills at the extraordinary Diet session. And now it's already December 26th, before I knew it. I've only been in my post for 3 months, but it feels like it's been a long half year. At the outset of the extraordinary Diet session, in my policy speech, I quoted the words of former Prime Minister Tanzan Ishibashi on this February 4th of 1957. Prime Minister Tanzan Ishibashi's policy speech was read on his behalf by Mr. Kishi, and that happened to be my birthday. And the Ishibashi administration only lasted for 65 days. It was very short, but according to Masaoka Hosoya, it was the shortest administration, but it achieved the most of all past administrations. So I'm sure that many people have different ways of assessing that administration. But at the outset of my policy speech, I quoted the words of former Prime Minister Tanzani Shibashi. And the message was that we should engage in discussion going beyond the individual partisan interests. You should not argue the interest of just the party or the region that you represent. Democracy, he said, is to go beyond that and take a much higher perspective. And I quoted the words of Prime Minister Shibashi because of the fact that we were in a hung parliament, that because it was a hung parliament, I wanted to achieve the real essence of what democracy was all about or should be about. Now, the LDP had a majority back then, and therefore any bill or any budget could be bulldozed through if the majority party so wished. However, because we are a ruling minority, we don't have the number of dietmen to reach a majority, and we cannot pass any budget or any bill without achieving a consensus that can exceed the majority. So we have to deliberate more and gain more understanding from the public about what we deliberate. Otherwise, the opposition parties would not consent. So managing a diet as a ruling minority or running a government as a minority, as a ruling minority, well, this is what it's all about. So I'm beginning to feel the realities. Now, 22 years ago, for the first time during the Koizumi cabinet, I became the Director General of the then Defense Agency. I was 45 years old. And from Mr. Koizumi, he told me I had to pass the bills relating to the contingencies. And the need for such bills relating to national contingencies has been argued from before. For example, I'm sure that you remember the incident of the dismissal of the Kurisu Hiromi, who was the chief of staff at that time. And the SDF will not move unless they're backed by a set of acts relating to national contingency. So we had to pass that acts. But this goes against civilian rule, control. And so it was not acceptable for the person at the top of the defense ministry to make such a statement, and so was dismissed. Mr. Kurisu was dismissed. Now, it's been 30 years now since the Hanshin-Awaji earthquake, and back then, the police cars or the fire engines, ambulances will go through red lights. But the SDF cars had to stop at every red light because they were not designated as emergency vehicles. This was so Japan-like. But in a contingency, would a tank run with a siren? That's very strange. That would be a very strange scene. So I'm sure there are many ways to think about this, but why in 1945, during the Okinawa War, so many people had to lose their lives? It's because during a contingency, during a war, the rule that we should not place civilians at the front line was not actually realized or complied with in Okinawa at that time or in Japan at that time. Also, the A-bombing of Hiroshima, Nagasaki, etc., So during the wartime, how to remove civilians from battle zones is a key consideration of any government, but we had no laws to back that up. And a contingency, National Contingency Act is that sort of law. That is, how to remove civilians from the front line of battle, how to ensure the smooth operation of the SDF during a contingency. I argue that such an act was necessary, and in a special committee, Mr. Fumio Kyuma was the top leader of LDP, and Mr. Seijiro Maehara was the top person for defense in the opposition party, and they engaged in some deliberations, and I'll never forget it. But at the plenary session of the upper house, it was only the Communist Party and the Social Democratic Party that disagreed against that bill. And the majority of the opposition parties, including the Democratic Party and the ruling parties, were for the bill. And I'll never forget that excitement when that National Contingency Act was passed. Because we are a ruling minority, be it bills or be it the budget bill, we cannot bulldoze any bill through with numbers, on the force of numbers. We must gain the understanding of the people. The more difficult, more controversial the issue is, we must exhaustively and carefully and very seriously explain our motives, not only to the opposition party members, but also to the people, the public, who are behind these representatives. And I think that is actually the essence of the Diet session of intense deliberation. As for the supplementary budget for 2024, for the first time in 28 years, as a national budget, and for the first time as a supplementary budget, the Diet budget amendment was passed. It was approved with the endorsement of several opposition parties. As for the political reform-related bills, now I said that we must eliminate the party's internal logic and arguments. And this may sound harsh, but I said that internal party logic and arguments that could not be appreciated by the people must be eliminated. And there was some resistance against this, but as the LDP president, or as the LDP, we decided to abolish the policy activity expenses. We also decided to disclose the uses of the former correspondence allowance and then return the balance if there's any remaining, and also to establish as early as possible a third-party organization. So such an LDP proposal was drafted, and then 9 bills were submitted by parties to the Diet's Special Committee on Political Reform, and after earnest debate, the political reform bills were enacted. And of course, there were issues where the LDP proposals were discarded or disregarded, but we knew that our views will not always be accepted as is, because we are a ruling minority. Even if you can't achieve 100% the LDP or Komeito proposals, it's important to move forward, even if one step at a time. And at the ordinary session of the Diet next year, we'll be deliberating the main budget. And I hate to look back on history again, but when we became Diet man in 1986, Mr. Noboru Takeshita and also Mr. Shinkanemaru and Mr. Kozo Watanabe were so-called experts or professionals in Diet steering. And what I learned from them was that although it may be difficult to gain agreement, at least convinced the other party. You must convince the other party. So to the opposition parties, it may be difficult to gain their agreement to any budget or bills, but at least make the effort to convince them and persuade them. of why it's necessary. So at next year's ordinary diet session, I would like to stay true to their advice. Now, after assuming office as Prime Minister, I have many opportunities to exchange views with experts from various fields, and I recently met with the chairperson, Mr. Yutaka Matsuo of the AI System Study Group, and Ms. Akiko Murakami, who is the acting chairperson of that same group. And my generation is known for Atom Boy, Astro Boy, sorry. And back then, the theme was to create a humanoid robot, and some segments were written by Osamu Tezuka to discuss what would be the benefits or the demerits of living in a robotic world. And some point out that with AI, for the first time in human history, we have created an existence which shares the same learning mechanisms as humans and has comparable cognitive, judgment, and thinking capabilities. So what sort of an age are we talking about when we say the AI age? I'm sure many of you have dreams, expectations toward this new era, but I'm sure also that many people feel this vague anxiety or concern about AI. AI technology has now become an extremely important factor that can determine a country's competitiveness and the wealth of its societies. And in rural areas suffering from labor shortages, as well as in the service, manufacturing, and industries, we believe that the use of AI may lead to the resolution of many different challenges. But at the same time, there are very risks associated with AI, and I think people hold this vague anxiety about AI. So it's essential to address these risks and concerns. The other day, Minister Ryosei Akazawa, in charge of economic revitalization, tweeted an AI-generated image of Prime Minister Ishiba as Santa Claus. I don't know what he was talking about or thinking about. And it became quite a buzz. And it was very well made, so I couldn't resist retweeting it. But I also keenly felt the need for a system to distinguish between AI-generated content and so-called human-generated content.
And in fact, if it is abused, then the fake information can spread very easily. And what I came to realize is that the Tanzan Ishibashi, the former prime minister, as well as Mr. Watanabe, used to state that for democracy, the space of healthy speech is essential. Otherwise, democracy is not viable. In order to defend such space of healthy space, how can we, in the age of Gen AI, to defend and protect space of healthy space? And how can we realize the provision of information about the content producers and digital advertisers on internet by way of originator profile? Such technologies would be required. And today we convened AI Strategic Council and received a draft report from experts. Based upon that report, we plan to submit a bill at the next ordinary session. And AI-related rulemaking is now being worked on by many countries internationally. And how can we create environment to facilitate R&D and the implementation of AI? We are currently thinking of developing such AI environment that could be the model in the world. And AI development is supported by utility, the electricity, data, semiconductor, and the human talent. And for semiconductor, it is the pivotal support of the DX and economic security, and therefore we produced a package for long-term, large-scale investment. By 2030, we will make the public support more than 10 trillion yen for AI and semiconductors, and more than 50 trillion yen for both the public and private sector investment over 10 years. And talking about the power consumption, it is expected that it will be boosted up due to the AI and DX. How can we continue to promote decarbonization and energy self-sufficiency? At the same time, we should work on energy conservation technologies as well as the use of renewables, and at the same time, the use of the nuclear power generation based upon the safety as the utmost importance, so that we can defend Japanese economy against energy constraint. And today, the GX Implementation Council is about to be convened, and there we plan to present the new vision that is entitled GX 2040 Vision. And here, as a way of moving forward, we want to see the creation of the new GX-related industries based upon innovations such as AI, quantum technology, and biotechnology, and a full scope of supply system combining from the material all the way up to the products be further advanced with the use of the carbon-free energy and DX. And with that, we hope to present the policies to promote the industrial transformation to create a new market, and which is internationally competitive. And we should also consider the optimal siting of the industries within Japan. For instance, we can think of accumulation of the new industries in the carbon-free energy sources rich regions, and they invite the data center into the region where the carbon-free energy resources are rich, and also consider the next generation grid network as well as information communication network to be effectively and efficiently developed, and the next generation fuels such as hydrogen and ammonium supply network as well as CCS be further developed. And in Akita and Hokkaido, with the clean energy produced by the offshore wind, the farm, their data center, semiconductor, batteries, and the car and other the carbon neutral related initiatives are going to be invited, and we would like to invite and encourage further initiatives. And we'd like to further upgrade the vitalization of a local economy 2.0 with the new elements such as AI and GX. And please refer to the chart that is distributed to you. Sorry, it is printed with such small fonts. Hope that you would take a look at that when you have a time. Recently, EMLIT came up with this chart. This is produced every 5 years. For 47 prefectures, economic affluence is ranked, as you see there. It is not per capita, but per household. The high net worth household and those with less endowed, when they are excluded to see the median and plus minus 10%, that is 20% of entire household. Put it plainly, that's about the average households. That's what we are looking at here, to rank prefectures by comparing the average household. On the top is about disposable income of all the households. Needless to say, or as a matter of course, Tokyo is number 1, followed by Ibaraki, Toyama, Saitama, and then comes Iwate. And the one at the last is Okinawa. You might agree and consider that this is what was expected. Next, this is about the median, that is the median households representing average households. And then Ibaragi becomes number 1, followed by Saitama, Nagano, and so on. Next, orange line. This is about the basic expenditures. That includes food, the rent, and utility. In this case, this is how it is ranked. Or put it differently, that's about the level of inflation. Kagoshima, that's where the price is lowest and the highest is in Tokyo. Again, you might agree with that. In other words, for average household, you deduct tax and welfare from the income, and then the household is left with disposable income, and then you further remove the rent, food, and utility, and then that will be represented in the ranking of the difference. The number 1, that's Ibaragi. And the second, that's Shimane. You might be rather puzzled. And number 3, you might be even more puzzled. That's Tottori. Ibaragi, Shimane, Tottori, Nagano, Shizuoka, Toyama. That's how top prefectures are ranked. And then the one in the bottom, that's about the commuting hours that are translated into income. And here again, Ibaragi. That's number 1. You might be puzzled again. Tottori is number 2. This may be somewhat shocking to you. I think it was 5 years ago that last time when the ranking was produced, Tokyo was at the bottom. And we were puzzled as to why was that the case. 10 years ago, I became the minister in charge of vitalization of local economy under Abe administration. Back then, with the over-concentration in Tokyo, with declining local cities, and therefore various measures have to be introduced. And therefore, various measures were introduced, and despite that, despite the pandemic, we still see that the concentration in Tokyo and decline of local communities. Why is that? In terms of economy, they are somewhat better off, and they are endowed with good food, and there are many people with empathy. And why is that such local communities are seeing the outflow of population, to us especially? When we consider the features of communities that would attract the young people and female, that should be the main topic that we should consider in this context. Well, I digressed just a little bit, but back in the time of Kakue Tanaka, he advocated plan for remodeling the Japanese archipelago, and the Garden City vision by Masayoshi Ohira, and recreation of homeland by Noboru Takeshita. Under any administration, the local revitalization was always the major challenge. And at the time of the Abe administration, what was discussed at the Diet was that the creation of homeland and the Garden City and remodeling the Japanese archipelago are different from what was under discussion back then. And back then, I responded that whatever the title would be, those visions by the predecessors were proposed when the Japanese economy was growing with growing population. So it was considered as something that would be nice to have. But back then, we didn't face a sense of the crisis that even when those visions are not realized, we will not lose, we could continue to survive. But now, the policy introduced this time is introduced at the time when population is declining, when the economy is declining. The service industry and primary industry, many of them are located in local or the local communities, and they have potential. And how can we promote their growth? after Meiji Restoration, if Japan left as a poor country as is, then the Meiji government was fearful of being colonized by Western countries, and therefore, under the banner of rich country and strong army, back then, the goal was to make Japan strong, and therefore, under Meiji government, they implemented policies for that, and as a result, that helped the acceleration of the concentration into Tokyo. And Niigata Prefecture, that used to be most populated some time ago. In fact, the population there was more than Tokyo. Around the time of the Japan-Russo War, well, Japan managed not to be defeated or managed to win, whatever the expression would be. That's when the population of Tokyo outnumbered that in Niigata. And back then, for the first time in the textbook, what is called the backside of Japan was introduced. Well, many of you may have originated from the prefectures facing the Japan Sea. Never ever use the expression of back Japan. As I was born in 1957, and back then during Showa era, even in the weather forecast by NHK, they used to say the weather tomorrow in backside of Japan. That was often used, and that made me angry. And but before that, there was an expression of like inner Japan, and the side of Japan that faces Pacific Ocean was called outside of Japan. But anyway, as I said, when the population of Japan outnumbered that of Niigata, and that's when the expression backside of Japan started to be used. And with the rich country's strong army policy, Japan managed not to lose in Japan-Russo War, and then eventually became a strong country in the world. But then Japan was defeated in the war. The national land was devastated. It was burnt down to ash, and therefore, from that time on, what Japan aimed for was the affluent Japan. And you might have seen the book authored by Taiichi Sakaya that was entitled The Third Creation of Japan, or Japan for the Third Time Creation, whatever. What he was talking about is the message that I was trying to convey to you. That was the first time of creation. That was when under the Meiji Restoration, aiming for a rich country, strong army. But then came the time of the World War II. Japan lost, and thus Japan was devastated. And with some intention by the United States, instead of aiming for a strong Japan, Japan wanted to be the affluent Japan, rich Japan, because if Japan was left as poor, then it might be taken or captured by the USSR or by China. That was not desirable by USA, and therefore, instead of becoming a strong Japan, that we should aim for the rich or affluent Japan. And for that purpose again, the unipolar concentration in Tokyo was promoted because it was considered as the most efficient and effective national policy. Well, have you ever heard of expression like unipolar concentration in London, Paris, or Rome? You've never heard of that. But it is adopted here in Japan as well as in Korea, and it was promoted as a national policy. And the policy succeeded, and in 1964, the Tokyo Olympic game for the first time met in Japan. And in 1968, back then we used to use the index GNP, and Japan became number 2 the outperforming West Germany. And then in 1970, there was Osaka Expo. And then 1972, there was Winter Olympic Games in Sapporo. So in just the short span of 8 years, the 2 Olympic Games and 1 Expo, they embodied the age of a second creation of Japan. And according to Taichi Sakaya, the first phase, that was creation of strong Japan, and the second phase, that was enriched or affluent Japan. And what is the third phase? And according to him, that's enjoyable country, enjoyable Japan. When I first read that, I had some kind of uneasiness, that is to say, because strong Japan and affluent Japan, that's easy to imagine or visualize, but what is this enjoyable country all about? But this was the last book by Taichi Sakaya, and I'm sure that he used that expression after many hours of thinking. And in the meantime, the local economies are losing their population. That's because those in the age cohort of 18 years and 22 years, as well as female, they are flowing out of local communities, local prefectures. And at the same time, the marriage rate is in proportion to the population level. And therefore, the Akita is the prefecture where the population decline is most outstanding. Among those prefectures facing Japan Sea, I would say that the people in Akita Prefecture have something common with Latino people, that is, people who enjoy drinking and enjoy happy life. Well, we tend to think that as expression of San-in, which is literally the shadow of the mountains, therefore we tend to visualize the region facing Japan Sea as something dismal, but the Akita Prefecture, that's said to be the prefecture of happy people. And at the same time, they are very faithful and diligent. And for instance, in terms of the economic achievement, Akita and Ishikawa, they achieved the highest the scores in exam. And if you take a look at the payment of NHK submission rate, you can see the payment by the population in 47 prefectures, and Akita is closest to 100%. But anyway, it is Akita where the marriage rate is the lowest, with the most conspicuous population declining. And what is the message embodied in this table? That may relate to the essence of this development. Back in the time of Osaka Expo in 1970, for those of you who are at certain age, you might still remember Expo in Osaka. That was back then under Sato cabinet. It was about the progress and harmony of mankind. That was the banner or the theme, and it was really enjoyable Expo. The venue full of dreams. Back then, I was the junior high school student, and I was riding on the diesel express train for 5 hours, and I stood in queue for the 2 hours or 3 hours trying to see the stone of the moon, and it turned out to be just the normal stones. But I'm sure that those of you who were there, they were willing to line up there. And what was demonstrated there, they were all realized, like the mobile phones, the moving walkway. And there was one product that was not commercialized yet. That was about the washing machine of the people, or the human washing machine. Do you remember that? You know that it was the full of the bubbles, and then the human body was washed up, but it was not commercialized. I wondered why, but anyway, The 52 hours prior to the opening ceremony, all the pavilions were finally complete. In the case of 1970 Expo, that was 52 hours prior to the opening ceremony. And in terms of the estimated budget, the original budget estimate was 52.9 billion. But actually, it costed 528.8 billion yen, whether the duration of the construction work or the budget was exactly what was originally estimated. So it was like a 52.8 billion. So that was a time when everything was achieved as planned. And if you come to the public residence of the Prime Minister, please note the symbol that is called the myaku-kun. You may remember the 5 petals. That was a symbol of Osaka Expo, but now the new version is myaku-kun. You don't understand why. But anyway, we want to bring about the great success to this new expo.
Values are changing quite rapidly, but in just 6 months, starting on April 13th, the scenes of the future will once again be displayed at the former Osaka Expo site. Once again, and those of people who visited the Kansai Expo may visit Tokyo, or may go to Kyushu or to Hokkaido. Well, rather than going back to their hometowns directly, we want to entice them to visit other areas in order to promote regional revitalization. In 1994, Japan accounted for 18% of the total GDP of the world. So a little less than 1/5 of the world's GDP was generated by Japan. Now that number has come down to 4%. Of course, it's because other countries have grown, but when it comes to the sense of presence, of economic presence in the world, we have fallen from 18% to 4%. So in a nutshell, we must transition from a cost-cutting economy to an economy that can generate high value add. So please be satisfied with the low wages because we will continue to hire you, and we can't pay enough pay to our other subordinate companies, but we will give you business. So please be satisfied with that. But I think that, people must be willing to pay more or pay a certain hefty sum because they are attracted by the product or the attractive service. So we must entice our people to spend more and more money on such attractive high value added products. And we would like to aim for an economy that's driven by wage hikes and investment. And we must also have a secure and comfortable social insurance system in order to stimulate more consumption, because economy that places an unproportionate burden on just a portion of the population, just some regions of the country, is not really a strong economy. Also, we must make sure that costs are passed through to prices. Otherwise, we will not be able to create a strong economy. So we need to create a new all-generation type social security and a economy and a growth type of economy that's driven by wage hikes as well as investment. I'm sorry for talking to so long, but I hope you will bear with me. Now, do you remember the earthquake in Noto Peninsula? It's been 1 year since then. Japan is one of the most disaster-prone countries in the world, and 20% of all of the world's earthquakes of a magnitude of more than 6 actually occur here in Japan, according to some theories. So here in this country, we must build a disaster-resilient nation that can prioritize the saving of human lives. And it's been 30 years since the Hanshin-Awaji earthquake, and Masaharu Gotoda back then said, we cannot prevent natural disasters. However, everything that occurs after that is actually human-made disasters. I still recall his words. So the Noto Peninsula on January 1st was struck by a major earthquake, and in September by torrential rains. And I visited the Noto Peninsula both times, and those people are always saying, why should we be the only ones to suffer like this? Because they're disaster-stricken, they suffer from unfavorable geographical conditions and financial difficulties. So regions that suffer such handicaps, they have to continue to suffer the hardship because even after they are stricken by a disaster. No, that's not the case. If they suffer from unfavorable geographical conditions and financial difficulties and are then hit by a disaster, then they must gain full-out support from the government. It's not possible to prevent earthquakes or torrential rains. However, with science, we should be able to increase our ability to predict these disasters. So we will increase the budget for a science agency to increase the level of prediction. Also, the evacuation centers and the situation there has not changed from 101 years ago since the major restoration. And we should not allow that to happen. We should not allow people to sleep on the hard floors of these gymnasiums. So that's not the way a nation should be. If we have to force these disaster-stricken people in regions with unfavorable geographical conditions to sustain their hardship. Now, deterrence power is not just promising a double backlash once attacked. It means that we will not lose even one citizen in Japan, even if we are hit by a natural disaster. That's also, I think, deterrence. Now, I talked about the National Security or Contingency Act that I passed back then, and I was really aghast to see why so many people died as a result of the Kanto earthquake. Air raids in Tokyo. There were air raids in Dresden as well, but the number of people who died was much higher in Tokyo. And the U.S. sent people to these areas to develop a report on the effects of such bombardments. And it said that the Japanese government has hardly thought about the lives of their citizens. And that's what the report said. And I was really, really shocked. That is, well, we did have a law to prevent air raids, and there were soldiers fighting for their lives at the front line. But citizens should not flee from air raids. They should go out to the streets and try to distill the fires. They suffered rains of such bombs, fire bombs, and so they had to go out to the streets to extinguish these fires using buckets. No wonder so many people lost their lives. And also in the evacuation centers, we also want to build more evacuation centers which comply with the so-called UN Sphere standards. And I believe that evacuation and also disaster prevention policies tend to reflect the attitude of countries. Now, for diplomacy, we must build a stable relationship with China. And our foreign minister was in China until yesterday. And so that the stable growth of China will lead to a stable growth of the region, we have decided, based on the direction of comprehensively promoting mutually beneficial relationships based on strategic interest, we will strive to build constructive and stable relations. And this was confirmed with President Xi, similar for ROK. today because next year we will make preparations for the 60th anniversary of the normalization of diplomatic relations, which is next year. And I had a telephone conversation with acting President Han Duck-soo, and we confirmed we will maintain close cooperation between the two countries in Japan, ROK, and the U.S. And I also had a telephone call with Mr. Zelensky, President Zelensky of the Ukraine last night, and I said that despite their hardships, we were always in support of the Ukraine, and we are also very, very concerned with the fact that North Korea will be supporting Russia and has sent dispatch forces to support them in this war. And also, I'll be visiting Malaysia and Indonesia next year, and both are Muslim nations, large Muslim nations in Asia. And Malaysia will hold the ASEAN presidency next year. Indonesia has ASEAN's largest population and economy, so we hope to build multi-layered relations with both countries.
And next year, on January 20th, the Trump administration of the second term is going to be inaugurated. Although timing is yet to be fixed, I'd like to have a meeting as early as possible with him to establish a relationship. According to Tanzan Ishibashi, he used to advocate the principle for Japan and the utilitarianism. And when I first read that, that was also quite confusing to me. What is this utilitarianism in diplomacy? But in the case of business or commerce, if one side only gains and the other side loses, such a relationship is not sustainable. That applies to diplomacy as well. Both sides have to benefit each other. So that could be considered as a utilitarianism, and that is true for Japan-U.S. relationship as well. Japan-U.S. security regime, it continues to be the foundation of the security and diplomacy policies of Japan. At the same time, the USA also enjoys the benefits out of this regime from a strategic point of view. And because of that, each side, the United States, has its own national interest, and we have our own, and therefore we should be engaged in frank exchange of views and opinions, trying to enhance national interests of both sides. Therefore, with President-elect Mr. Trump, we'd like to be engaged in such a frank opinion to further enhance the relationship between the two. And the fundamental enhancement of the defense capability is what we are working on as one of the priorities. And under my administration, I mentioned that the SDF personnel, the treatment and the status, employment should be employed. And you may know that SDF official personnel retire at the age of 56 years because of the younger age, the force that is required. But at the age of 56 years old, he might still has the boys that are going to a high school. No matter how splendid vehicles and escort vessels and the planes are there, you have to have people that can run or drive those vehicles, and therefore their working conditions have to improve. And at the same time, I think of the food sufficiency. Japan food sufficiency rate is only 39%. We often say that without food or meals, that you cannot fight effectively. And some say that the war today will not last long. But why is that? The war in Ukraine doesn't end early. And then think of the self-sufficiency. I like the ramen noodles, but the self-sufficiency ramen noodle is only 15%, and the udon noodle is only 20%. In the case of curry rice, although the rice is 100% produced here in Japan, many of the ingredients in curry sauce are coming from overseas, and therefore we have to improve the self-sufficiency of food as well in Japan. I'm sorry for talking too long, especially about my memories. But I like to chat on Michio Watanabe, my mentor, who used to say that he started with a question. What is a mission? What is a job of the politicians? Why do you want to be a politician? Do you want to gain money, or do you want to be awarded, or do you want to be respected? If that's the case, then resign right now. Rather, there is just one mission for the politician: to tell the truth with courage and sincerity. And the truth, you have to discover that by yourself. And you have to tell that with courage and sincerity. And you have to convince the party that you're talking to. So to convince the other party, the other side, you need sincerity. That's even before I became the member of the parliament more than 40 years ago. And yet I still feel quite regrettable that it is not realized yet. In other words, the sincerity may be insufficient to tell the truth, and the courage that's not sufficient to tell the truth. We have to be aware of such deficiency and try to overcome each one of those defects for the sake of the country of Japan and for the next generation. I hope that I can continue to work. I do realize my shortcomings, but with your help and support, hope that we can strive toward the creation of better Japan. Thank you very much for your attention.
Ishiba 総理、熱のこもったお話をありがとうございました。それではほとんどお時間がなく恐縮ですが、質疑応答に
Please raise your hand if you have a question, please. 熊谷さん。Prime Minister Ishiba, thank you for a splendid speech. Thank you. I'm from Daiwa Soken. My name is Kumagai. And former Prime Minister Nakasone said that politicians are a defendant that must be tried at a court called history. And to summarize your speech today, I would like to ask the following question. Mr. Ishiba, maybe in 50 years' time or 100 years' time, what sort of a politician would you like to be remembered as by people 50 or 100 years later? Well, you talked about the words of Mr. Michio Watanabe, but what is the vision of an ideal state that you, a politician, Mr. Ishiba, is aiming for? Well, I think a state or nation or Japan must be independent and sustainable at the same time. In Japanese, there's no real good word to translate sustainability. But is Japan really an independent country? Are we really a sustainable country? And with courage and sincerity, I would like to pose that question to the people. Because being a politician is just a means and not an end. And be it food sufficiency or energy sufficiency or the population problem, I don't think that Japan is in a sustainable state at all. And are we in an independent state? No, I think there are many areas that require improvement when it comes to independence. But neither have been actually discussed openly with the public. But I would like to pose those questions to the public who are the sovereign nationals here in Japan. And of course, they may say, what are you talking about? I don't know what you're talking about. But still, we must talk about the facts with courage and sincerity. And in 50 or 100 years' time, I want to be remembered as one of those politicians who made such an argument. Thank you.
I know that Prime Minister Ishiba has to leave now, and therefore, we'd like to conclude this seminar tonight.